welcome to Season 3 of the Fresh and Fired Up podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Marshall, joined today by my co-host, Hailee Fitblog. So glad you're here today.
I am so
glad you made time for us.
You know, I fit you guys into my schedule.
Oh yeah, finally made space in your schedule because we are inspiring each other to excellence in health, fitness, and business. So let's get fired up.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, I thought you were going to repeat. You love repeating it.
I always repeat it. And then, you know what? It's so funny that you said that because I was about to repeat it. And like, you know what, Hailee, you do that always. So just maybe change it up. Do a heck yeah. So
heck yeah. Well, both of us are so excited to have Katie Finnegan-Crispin on the show today. She is an estate planning attorney who loves travel and staying active. And so I'm so excited to hear and share her story with you. She owns her own estate planning law firm in St. Louis. So congrats, Katie, because I know that's a new venture for you. So we can't wait to hear all about it and your insights on estate planning. So yeah, we're going to dive in just a few minutes, but I know you have a really big heart behind a lot of the misconceptions floating around about estate planning and how it can affect your well-being. And I know you had shared with me previously, your mission has become to educate people on the importance and benefits, especially for people at a younger age who might not have their head wrapped around this topic yet, or really maybe people just don't know anything about it. So this is going to be a great resource for you to help you get things in order for yourself and your family members to avoid complications that can occur down the road that could be very stressful for you. So welcome. And we're so grateful to have you, Katie.
All right. Thanks for allowing me to come on. I'm pumped to be here. This is awesome. It's good to be amongst other go-getters. I love it.
Yep. And I feel like for yourself, I know you were just saying you're new to podcasting. So that I'm just proud of you. And I love having guests on that haven't been on a lot of podcasts, or maybe like it's their first podcast, because I think it's a great example for jumping into something you've never done before. So I just think it's awesome that you're here from that standpoint. And I think the message that you have to share is a really important one. So I want to get into the 101 of your background before we get into estate planning 101.
Sweet. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I will admit I've got pit stains coming on my end. So thank God you can't see that. But
thank you for your openness.
It's like all of a sudden a half an hour ago, I was like getting sweaty under the armpits. I'm thinking, what's going on here? Of course I'm nervous, but it's because, like I said, I'm pumped to be here, and it's great to be around other women who are just, trying to make a difference for other women, right? Women like to talk to women. So back to your question, to try not to get into the weeds too much. Where I came from, I will say I'm pretty your typical basic bitch. Pardon me. I don't know if I.
Yeah.
All right, we'll take the cussing out of it.
I love it.
I noticed your plaid shirt, so I was like, yeah. You like pumpkin spice too?
Oh, girl, it's Halloween. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The last day for pumpkin spice. Get ready for white mocha season.
I'm ready. Peppermint bark. Bring it on.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, I grew up in the great flyover state of Missouri in the US of A. In terms of my educational background, I went to an all-girls private high school, and shout out Nearings Hall. I have to. I'm from St. Louis. It's what we do here. And I went on to attend the University of Missouri in Columbia for my undergrad, where I actually graduated with a health science degree, which, as you can imagine, has been very helpful in my estate planning career. But I then went on to law school at St. Louis University School of Law, graduated in 2019, just before COVID. Thank God. I got a real graduation ceremony. And then I took the bar and I began working as a law clerk for the Missouri Court of Appeals. It's a state court. It's kind of sandwiched in between the trial court level and the Supreme Court level. And I did that for about a year. That was an incredible experience. It was, the judge told me, I want you to treat this as continuing education. Um, and that's kind of been like a theme throughout my life, is that always be learning mentality. And I think that it has gotten me to this point. So I did that for a year. I got a lot out of it, just became a sponge. And then I moved on to the private practice world, and began working for an estate planning, administration, and litigation firm. And I had a really good mentor who was my boss. And it was when you're doing this law clerk job, it's everything under the sun. It's criminal work, it's civil work. But this estate planning topic or niche of the law is so like not too many people do it, and it's kind of becoming more infiltrated as the years go on. But it was like something that I mean, I didn't know anything about this topic. It was that mentality of, okay, well, let's dive right in. Like, I'm going to learn a lot, and then I'm going to figure out what's next for me. And so that was kind of my mindset going into it, not really realizing that it would take me to this point, where now that was in November of 2020, where I started at that firm, and just kind of over the past 4 years or so, I've been putting a lot of work into my personal and professional development, and it's kind of, piece by piece, just working in the background, me not really knowing where it was going to lead me. And a month ago, I decided I'm going out on my own, and here we are. So now I've got my own estate planning law firm.
That is so cool. It's funny, actually, my family is in the midst of unraveling a will. Just correct me if I'm wrong so I don't babble on to something that's completely irrelevant. You do like wills and stuff for your estate, yes?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, cool. And the amount of stress that it's put on my family, and everything comes out when money's involved. I'm curious what kind of situations you've been exposed to, because when money is involved, and say like the inheritance isn't dispersed in like a quote unquote fair to some people's mind, like literally everything's gone to heck. Like no one talks to anyone anymore. It's really a big stressor on families. So having something in place before that even happens is so important. Even if it is in place, sometimes it can cause some distress. But yeah, I just wanted to know like what kind of stress you've seen it put on families when things aren't put into place prior to um, obviously someone passing.
Yeah, I mean, I have had the benefit of these last 4 years that I've been in private practice. Actually, my main focus was the litigation piece of it. So I'm seeing everything that's happening after so and so's death, and just kind of the ramifications that occur. It becomes a very emotionally involved process for the family members. And it's my job to keep everything as factual and non-emotional as I can, which I'm a very emotional and sensitive person. So I think that allows me to kind of meet clients where they are at, while also knowing, okay, what's the like practical implications of all of this, and how is this really going to work out? But yes, I mean, there's stressors. And I think an important point you made, Hailee, was that there can be stressors even when you have a plan in place. And so that's something that, as part of my mission, which is to educate people about, estate planning and its importance, and is to just let people know like the reality of it. Like, you could, just because you have an estate plan, it's not fire that nothing's going to go wrong. You're mitigating risks is what you're doing. So you're mitigating the risks of that emotional distress on your family. You're mitigating the risks that your assets will kind of become lost in the ethernet or taken by the government or taken by, the government through taxes or taken by the government through the court system. So I think that's probably the biggest thing when people don't have a thing or don't have an estate plan in place, is that your stuff's going to probate. And
Yeah.
probate is that dirty word in our this niche of the law that I think it has taken on to become a monster, because with probate, it means that all of your assets, in order to be dispersed from the bank account or your house to be acquired and then sold later, it all has to go through the court system, and it has to get the judges okay, and it's subject to those court costs. And whether that's coming out of your estate or whether that's coming out of the pockets of your beneficiaries, I mean, it just can become very messy and
And long.
costly and long and very time consuming. Yes, I think that's one of the hardest things for me, is that sometimes I can be a little hopeful that, oh no, we're going to get this done. I never tell clients, like, they always want to know, how long is this going to take in terms of administering an estate after someone has a past, and you have to kind of go through the procedure of it to get those assets distributed out. But I never tell clients it's going to take this amount of time, because there's always something that would maybe come up. Sometimes it goes faster than I think, but yeah, it can be time consuming, stressful, and costly. So
Oh,
it's
sure. For sure.
very,
It's been like 3 years for us now. It's just crazy. But that also brought up a question for me. A lot of my audience is like 20 to 30. What is your suggestion in terms of like, when should somebody implement like a plan when they have some assets, or like, is there an age that you see is best to implement that, or what's your thoughts on that?
well, I'm going to say something that people will probably resist, but I think that everyone, when they turn 18, should have a plan. Um, I think that, and this, full disclosure, I did not have a plan when I was 18, right? I didn't even know I wanted to be a lawyer when I was 18. But I think it's becoming increasingly important for people to take control of their finances and become educated about their finances. And that's one thing that I wish that I had delved into earlier in my life, and just like invested in that kind of learning. And now I'm 30, so there's plenty of time, but um, just like the basic education of your finances and being able to put those somewhere and know that they're protected, and having an estate plan early allows you to kind of amend it over time. So initially I would say 18, but usually what we see um, is that people start to get married. They start to have big life changes, get married, they have children. Unfortunately, at my prior firm, a lot of our not unfortunately, but a lot of our clients were in that 50 to 60 range. Their kids are out of college. They're thinking about death more. And they're like, oh, crud, I need to get something in place. So what I would like to get people to start thinking about is that we want to do it when we're younger. We want to set it up. We want to, if you get married, you can have a single trust. You could have a joint trust with your spouse. When you have children, you've got a whole other host of things to think about. Their guardianship, who's going to take care of them, who's going to be in charge of your healthcare decisions if you're not able to, which obviously affects your entire family. So, I mean, as early as possible, and I think that the sooner I can reach people and make them realize the importance of it, the better. And that's my life's mission. So,
And is that something, so just thinking about some of the things you've said already, even the financial piece when you're thinking about that, when you're planning for that. When you mention like the court costs and all those extra things that I don't think come to mind for people, is that something you recommend, like even planning that in advance? Like, could you be setting aside money towards the different components that will occur with this process, or is it kind of different every time?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think that as much foresight as you can have, the better. I mean, the idea with those court costs and probate is that we avoid that altogether. So, um, ideally, you would, and there's no one size fits all. Every estate plan is going to be different based on a person's lifestyle, family situation, goals. So it really, I don't want to sit here and say everybody needs a trust, because that's not necessarily true. But a huge benefit of a trust is that it puts all of your assets in this one space, and then you can avoid that probate process down the road.
Okay, because that was going to be my next question, because you kind of already touched on some of the purpose behind, right? Like the purpose behind having an estate plan, but then the specifics, like the key documents, wills have come up, the trusts have come up, powers of attorney, like, can you just give us the 101 of like the basics of what people would ask or need to know when they're going through this process?
Yeah, so I think that probably, I hope this is being debunked a little bit, but there's a misconception that a will and a trust are, it's like, do I need a trust or do I need a will, right? Or some people think that they're the same thing. But they are actually different. The idea, the overarching idea is that both of these documents are going to say who's going to get your stuff and who's going to be in charge. Now there's separate nuances involved with each one. A will specifically will say who's going to take care of your children, who's going to be the guardians of your children. A trust cannot do that. And so it's important to emphasize the difference of them in the benefits of a trust, keep avoiding that probate process, but knowing that whenever I recommend like your basic comprehensive plan that involves a trust, I'm always going to put a pour over will in there. So it's a will, it's called a pour over will. And it's called that because it's essentially like a catch-all. So the idea is you put all your assets in this trust, but if there is an instance where maybe you acquire an asset later, you forget to put it in that trust, then it's going to fall to probate. But this will is going to catch it and it's going to say everything goes to my trust. So it pours over into the trust. And so while I want to stress the emphasis of avoiding that probate process, there is a situation where it might be necessary. And that's again, we're mitigating risks, right? We're having that pour over will just in case there's an asset. And it will make that process so much quicker, and it will alleviate a lot of the costs, the stressors that would be involved with a typical probate process where there's just a will and there's not a trust, or there's not any will at all. So, if like from the most basic standpoint, it is just where your assets going, to whom they're going to, and who's in charge. So as far as when I'm thinking about like an estate plan, I think about the trust, I think about that pour over will, and then I think about what you mentioned, Emily, is those two powers of attorney. Okay, there's a financial power of attorney and there's a healthcare power of attorney. The financial power of attorney at its core is to designate someone of your choosing to take care of your assets during your lifetime that are outside of your trust. Okay. So again, ideally, you create a trust, you put everything into the trust, but you're not, except certain assets like your retirement accounts. You're not going to put your 401ks, 403bs, you're not going to put those into the trust. Everything else, house, bank accounts, you will. And the reason you don't put those in the trust is because of tax reasons. And I'm not going to pretend like I'm an accountant. There's a lot of tax implications involved, but just keep those out. So the idea with the financial power of attorney is that it's going to allow someone to manage those assets in the event you become incapacitated. And that financial power of attorney, it dies when you die. So that's where the will comes in and picks it up. And the trust is functioning all along. There's no like stoppage when you die. That's the point of it too, is that it's a seamless transition into your death. So I hope that, it's all very exciting to me. I know that that can be very daunting and like boring. I'm not oblivious to that. And, I'm trying to make this nuance or this niche of the law as sexy and attractive as I can for people. So please stop me if I'm just going on a rant here. But basically, that's your financial power of attorney, your healthcare power, and it's with finance decisions, right? Healthcare power of attorney is going to be your healthcare decisions. Who do you want to make those at a very stressful time? I mean, it's a state by state document. There's different forms, but Missouri's in particular, it allows for the healthcare power of attorney piece and the advanced directive. And the advanced directive is like, I want artificial nutrition. I want life sustaining procedures. That's going to be filled out. And your agent is just going to step in to make those decisions. And, if there's any decisions that are not laid out in that document, which hospital to go to, do you need to see this doctor? That's going to be your agent under the healthcare power of attorney.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was thinking about this as you're talking, because I think this is all really good for educating on the what's and the hows of this process. I was thinking about a concept more from a mindset standpoint, which is the first step is knowing that this is needed. The next step is actually implementing. And I think there's definitely a larger gap between there's the gap between not knowing to knowing, but then I think it's a larger gap between knowing and actually doing. So I'm going to ask a financial piece, I think, that could affect driving people forward to actually implement the things that you're saying, which is when you are looking at the costs of hiring a lawyer, like hiring yourself to be able to go through this process, the cost of that, I know that it could vary compared to if you avoid that cost in the short term, how much more is that going to cost you in the long term? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Great question.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question, because I think that's one thing that's the thing that stops people, is that they don't want to spend a couple $1,000s on an estate plan. I mean, who can blame them? Especially young people. And that's why it is so difficult to reach young people too, because we all feel like we're going to live forever, right? I'm young, I'm healthy, like I don't need to think about death yet. I'll worry that down the road and I'll have more money and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, that's a legitimate concern. But what, I always come back to too is like, and I'm going a little bit off your question here, but it's important to remember that like death and incapacity does not discriminate. And, an estate plan is not just about your inevitable death. It's about I get in a car accident tomorrow and I can't do this and that. Who's going to step in and do that? So it's preparing for those events as well. And as we know, I mean, it can happen to anyone at any time. So, I mean, I think if you think about it long term, what are the issues that are financially, it's going to be a lot worse. I mean, if you don't have an estate plan in place and you hit that probate process in Missouri, there's a statutory fee that attorneys, you have to hire an attorney for the probate process. Okay. So that's one costly measure. You've got to pay court costs, these just for filing fees, that kind of stuff. That's another couple $100. And I mean, it slowly and surely just racks up on those attorneys' fees and court costs that are inevitably involved in the probate process. So I think that is one thing that I'm really gonna try to infiltrate and stress the importance of like, you're not paying for it now, you're paying down the road. So choose your hard, which, you know, we live in a society of immediate satisfaction. So we, we don't want to pay for it now. But I mean, if you guys have any, from your perspective, tips of how I can encourage people to pay for it now and reduce the cost down the road and reduce the stress down the road.
Yeah,
Time,
it's
time is money.
interesting. I want to hear your thoughts, Hailee. I also was just going to say, from my own hearing you say about major life changes, I know when we went through the process, my husband and I, it was actually once we were business owners. Like what we, you know, we had our first child right like during I hadn't even graduated yet from chiropractic college. And then I started working as an associate, and you're kind of like, we didn't really have a lot of assets in our mind. I mean, we had a child, but our we weren't really thinking about that, like you said. And so then it wasn't until we moved across the country, bought the clinic that we own now, and we were like, okay, we now have a business. We now have, you know, we were renting, and then we bought a house, and then we were like, and now we have more kids, and we're like, okay, we need to get this stuff sorted out. And also around that time that we bought a business, my dad passed away. And so I think also a death in your family can trigger your brain to be like, oh, whoa, I actually was expecting him to be around for another 20 years. And now he's not, right? And so it kind of hit, you know, not to get all dark and gloomy, but it does kind of hit you like that life is not, you know, just going to last forever as we know it right now. So yeah, so that's just kind of my 2 cents of like, I definitely think what you're saying is like major life change can drive the change. That's one thing. But what are your thoughts, Hailee?
I'm thinking when you were speaking on it, it's kind of like insurance. Like
Yeah.
everything is fine until it's not fine, you know? So kind of looking at it from a standpoint that it's not really for you, it's for your family member. Well, it is for you in an instance where your health kind of declines and you want someone to be in charge of that. But say you pass away and now your family is left with all of this crap that they have to deal with now. Having that in place can kind of, just like you've said before, alleviate some of that stress for them. So it's not necessarily for you. And I am very guilty. I do not have anything in place right now. I will be very candid with that. And I
Hailee,
should.
get your crap
I
together.
really should. I really should, because I do have assets.
Mhm.
And I should have something in place. And you've actually inspired me to kind of look into that and do more of my due diligence and be more of an adult towards that. Because like you said, Emily, like things can change in the blink of an eye. And there's been so many instances where I've had like some friends have passed away from like getting hit by a drunk driver or something like that. Like things happen, and it can happen, and your life can just be taken like that. So it is very important to have a plan for not only yourself, but also for your loved ones, to not be you don't want to be a burden for everyone else when you go, right? So you've
Yeah,
definitely inspired me.
Well,
that's awesome.
thank you.
I also think about quality of life, right? Like
Yeah.
when you think about, especially if you have siblings, if you're like my parents having plans in place, we're a family of 4 siblings, and I'm super grateful. We all get along really well. We're all pretty chill, and none of us are very attached to things. So there were parts of our thing, like my brother actually, yeah, bought and lives in the house that we grew up on. And it's a
Oh,
beautiful
cool.
house on the water, like waterfront property. And, you know, he was like, if I'm going to raise my family here, I don't want to be like splitting this house between, you know, anyway, I was just like, it's fine, man. Do your thing. We live on the other side of the country. Like, you take the house. And so, again, not overly attached. So for us, like that all went pretty smoothly. Like my mom's still living, right? So it's her and she's still living. It's kind of like 2 houses in one, and she's living in the top half. My brother is raising his family in the bottom half. But the point is, like working through those details can look different for everyone. But I could only imagine if we were all like hyper attached to the house, that could have been a lot messier. And yeah, so I just feel like for the quality of life of your kids, if and when you have kids, or if you already have kids, to have the stuff split up so that you're not creating animosity between them, so that you can think about your family legacy and go, well, after I pass away, I want my kids to all be getting along and all be talking to each other, and my grandkids to play together or whatever. So I think having the future vision, that's like this positive vision that you can be like, I can be a part of facilitating that process for my family.
Yeah,
By
it
doing
does. Yeah, it does break apart like families. Like for like I know I'm kind of in this whole situation right now. It's on my dad's side, and they like no one's ever going to talk to each other again. And when money gets involved, it's just like it's very easy to get attached to the money. It's not even a big amount of money, but like you said, Emily, like it's very important to not be attached to tangible things or money or things like that. Like it's so much more important to have those memories and have a good relationship with your siblings and your grandkids and your kids and nieces and nephews and things like that. So I think that's also a very important thing to note on is like for what
relationships.
it's worth. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, you want to preserve those relationships. And I mean, Emily, I can relate. I come from a sibling, or there's three, excuse me, there's four of us. Okay, I'm the youngest sibling. And like there's harmony amongst the siblings, and like I just we get along really well, but you just never know like what's coming down the road. And the most like heartbreaking thing I hear is like I never thought I would have this would happen to my family, and my mom or dad would be rolling over in their grave if they knew we were fighting over this.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
I mean, it can get ugly quick. It doesn't matter if it's a couple dollars or $1 million. Like
Yeah.
I think money is an amazing thing, but it does have some demons involved with it, and I think that I have definitely seen that in my job. And Hailee, I'm sorry you're going through that, because that can be taxing on everyone.
Yeah.
But and so that's why we need estate plans, and that's why we need this open, even more basic than that, an open conversation about what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Talking about death, acknowledging that it's going to happen, thinking about it, talking about it, putting it on paper. I mean, it's all um, important. It can be dreadful, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, to your point, Hailee, like people get life insurance and they don't really think too much about
Exactly.
it. I mean, they're not thinking, oh, this is my death, my mortality, but it's a necessity. And I think that that's where estate planning kind of gets a bad rep, like worse than life insurance. It's not seen as a necessity. It's seen as like a privilege, and it is a privilege, but it's not just for the wealthy. Okay. I mean, you could die with, as I said, $1 or $100. And if you don't have a plan, all of that's going to probate. Okay. So
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask next is like, what happens if you die without an estate plan?
yeah, I mean, it
The
goes,
government.
which, yeah, I
The
mean,
government.
right. I mean, so if you don't have an estate plan, it's the state is deciding who's getting your stuff. There's laws of what's called intestacy. When you die without an estate plan, you're dying intestate. And yeah, you don't get. I mean,
But
just
if
be,
you're married, what if you're married? Is it automatically your spouse then?
well, so I can speak to Missouri, and that's if you're married and all your children are within that marriage, then the spouse gets the first 20,000 and then first half of the estate. Or actually, it might be the fullest. I should know this, but either way, your spouse is in a more advantageous position if all of your children are of your
Okay.
spouse, mutual. Whether there's blended families, and I come from a blended family, my husband comes from a blended family, so like it's different. The spouse is only going to get a certain amount when there's one child that's only the decedents, and it's a stepchild of the
Okay.
surviving spouse. So the state's deciding who is what proportion of your estate is going to whom. And you may not want that.
Yeah, that sounds complicated too.
Yeah. And I also wanted to point out I'm really enjoying that we're talking about this as well and bringing awareness to it because I think another barrier especially for younger people, if that's kind of the demographic you're trying to reach, is it's very scary to talk about this law stuff. No one knows any jargon or anything like that. So just exposing the process and just being exposed to more information can help with that, calm the nerves, or calm the, or, you know, close the gap between not doing it and doing it, right? So yeah.
Yeah. And I think, you know, lawyers, they have big egos. I think we like to use fancy words. My mom always makes fun of just like the legal jargon back and forth. And she's like, did you really need to use that word? And it's kind of out of habit. It's just what I'm around. But it's like really trying to simplify the process because it doesn't have to be complicated. And I think that, um, you know, people maybe see it as complicated and then they're just like, I don't want to deal with it, throw their hands up. But it doesn't have to be complicated. I want all of my clients to be educated on what you're doing, why you're doing this. And I mean, that's why estate planning lawyers exist. We're here to solve problems. We're here to explain the process to you, tell you what's happening and why, and then do the work and then take the burden off your plate. So if I could just, you know, I'm just trying to get through to people to we just all want to be problem solvers. And I think with my particular journey, like I said, I never saw this coming, but I finally realized this is like, and I know it sounds like cliche to say we all want to help people, but I think during our life we figure out, okay, in what ways am I going to help people and solve their problems? And I finally found estate planning as that means to the end. So, and I want to reach people at this emotional level because it's an emotional process, and the emotion shouldn't be taken out of it. But you kind of need someone there to take that burden off of you, take and reduce the stress. And so that's
Yeah.
why we're here.
And well, and asking the questions can really help minimize fear avoidance behavior. I always think of it that way because with my chiropractic background, it's like when people injure themselves, then they avoid whatever injured them. It's called a fear avoidance behavior, right? And so I think the same thing happens with even thinking about, would I be incapacitated or am I going to die someday? Well, that scares me, so I'm just going to avoid it. But that's not actually the answer. That can actually amplify the fear rather than educating yourself, getting help, asking the questions like we've been talking about today. So I think that education piece is huge. I had one more question before we'll probably wrap up soon. How do you choose an executor or a trustee?
That's a good question. And you know, the terms are different, but they're technically the same. The executor.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask. What's the difference or not difference then?
So an executor or executor is when you're talking about your will.
Sorry, I said executor.
I was like, what? Execute? Who's getting executed?
I'm sorry. See, I'm going full morbid on this episode.
Oh gosh.
Bringing the heat this morning. Fired up. The executor would be the authority figure under your will, and the trustee is the authority figure under your trust.
Okay.
So again, we're just talking about who's going to be controlling your assets. In terms of who you want to pick, I mean, typically, if you're married, you're going to pick your spouse, right? If you pick the right one. And then beyond that, if you have adult children, I mean, I'm just speaking from my experience, it's usually going to be the adult children. It's people that you trust that are going to do what you want to be done, right? So it's someone who can, and that's why it's easy to have, if you have that conversation and you kind of all are on the same page as to who's going to take control and what needs to be done, that kind of stuff. I mean, it makes it a lot easier with the communication piece after the fact, after you had passed and after your spouse had died. So, you know, and life changes, right? Like I am now because of what I do, I'm now the executor and trustee of my parents' trust. Okay. But like 5 years ago, my oldest brother was. So, and you know, life changes, certain things in families, like as far as health complications, people are dealing with different stressors. So it's really someone that you just know can get the job done. And, maybe a peacemaker is probably a good person to have there. But again, like, I think that peace of mind and peacefulness comes from also just having the conversation about who's going to be in charge. And I think an important piece of that too is that, sometimes when we come from, well, not necessarily blended families, but like married families, we want to give, oh, well, if my brother's going to do this for me, then my husband's sister needs to also be there to do it, like keeping things fair. And I think that is a great thought. And I think it's a noble thought, but I think it's important to keep in mind too, that when you're appointing these people, I mean, that's a job. Okay. So it's not a job that everybody wants. And so it's again, my job to try to like keep the emotions out of it, as much as I can. That would be helpful to say, well, are you doing that? Like, who are you doing that for? Do they really care? They probably don't care. So just pick one and like, be done with it, as opposed to, well, I need to be fair on either side of the family. It's just, it's not always the case. I mean, you can do it. You can do whatever you want, but I see that a lot as people are like, well, I want to people please. And it's like, well, I mean, ultimately you're asking them to do a job. It's an important job. So just pick who you think can do the job.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes so much sense. All right. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much. Hailee or Katie, is there anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
Nope. No questions.
No questions.
I think we covered a lot of stuff. I loved it.
Yeah, that was a lot.
You get that plan in place, sister.
I know. Thank you.
Report
I needed a
back.
kick in the butt.
We'll be your accountability. Okay, well, my big take-home point is make sure in the process of estate planning, you hire an estate planning attorney, not an executor.
You don't want to be executed.
No.
Nobody wants that. But okay, well, thank you again for being on, Katie. We're going to put her contact in the show notes for you so you can connect with her, because she is amazing. And share this episode with a friend, because we want more people to find this a peaceful, positive process for them and their families. Make sure you rate or review and click the subscribe button. In the meantime, be free, feel fresh, and live on fire.
Killer.
Denzo, peace.
All right, girls. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it.
Thank you. You did amazing. You did amazing, by the way.
Yeah, you did. Thank you so much. I'm excited. Okay, it might not be out for a little bit, but we'll be in touch. I think you did you already send me a headshot of yourself?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I have it. Okay, cool. So we will keep you posted on when it's coming out.
Sweet. All right. Well, thank you. I need to take after your guys' social media. That's another thing I'm trying to work on. My game is so weak, but
social media is a beast.
Dude, that's how I'm like, I need to reach.
I'm ready to execute all mine.
Oh my God.
Sometimes I feel like it. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to take you behind the barn and just.
No, wait, you being like, oh, you're inspiring when you said that, Kate. I was like, oh, thank you.
Oh, girls. Yeah. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for having me. Really. You guys are awesome.
Yeah, you too. All right, guys. Have a good day.
Bye. Have the best day of your life.
Yeah, you too. Bye.
Bye.